In the darkest hours of the coronavirus pandemic, in the face of massive economic upheaval, a formerly fringe economic concept keeps popping up again and again: universal basic income. The definition of a true universal basic income, or UBI, is pretty straightforward. It's an amount of cash given to everyone within a geographic area that's then distributed unconditionally, regularly, and on a long-term basis. It makes sense we're talking about it now. Times of fear and unrest have historically been great times to implement social safety nets. Think FDR, Social Security, the Great Depression, and the national healthcare systems that popped up in Europe after World War II. Though UBI was first thrust into the mainstream spotlight in the 2010s over fears that automation will kill millions of jobs, COVID-19 could be the tipping point that actually implements it in the 2020s. The story of universal basic income begins in a defunct hamlet called Speenhamland in Berkshire, England. At the time, millions were out of work in Britain, not by their own doing. A bad harvest sent grain prices through the roof. Hoarders, black marketeers, and a war with France only made matters worse. There was no such thing as unemployment insurance, so the out of work had two options. If you were deemed deserving poor, you'd go to charitable housing, while everyone else went on what we call permanent workfare, indentured to landowners. But in Speenhamland in 1795, radical officials came up with a new idea. Just give people money, regularly, whether they're working or not, with no strings attached. The system became known as the Speenhamland System, or the Berkshire Bread Act, and it quickly became a sensation. The Prime Minister at the time even wanted to implement it nationwide. Ultimately, though, pushback was just too strong. He couldn't get his bill through Parliament. Even worse, a fabricated government report in 1834 dismantled the Speenhamland system, and the falsified report has been used in the years since to invalidate the concept of UBI. During the Great Depression, Milton Friedman, an economist with a reputation for being a radical libertarian, proposed a negative income tax, a system in which individuals earning below a particular threshold receive funds from the government rather than paying taxes. Friedman's idea caught on further in 1969 when President Richard Nixon presented the Family Assistance Plan, a poverty alleviation program that would have given working and notably non-working poor families a form of negative income tax. That would have been huge, but the plan was ultimately killed by the Senate, and UBI history came back to haunt them too. Someone in Nixon's administration had summarized the falsified Speenhamland system report to him, which caused him to waver on his commitment. For a time, UBI was pretty much dead as a political issue. The momentum for UBI that we're seeing today really ramped up following the 1-2 punch of the 2008 financial crisis and the growing knowledge that automation was threatening US jobs. Tech leaders like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk were soon voicing support for UBI. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey recently got behind the cause as well, throwing some of his fortune into UBI projects. Ultimately, the UBI automation argument found something of a figurehead in entrepreneur Andrew Yang, whose presidential campaign brought the concept out of the fringes and into the national spotlight for a lot of people.
I obviously champion universal basic income, which I believe is going to be necessary to help resolve how 40 million Americans are going to put food on the table. That is actually a choice we can make as a society. My great hope is that we just choose to abolish poverty, and we can do it tomorrow if enough of us get together to do it. And that, to me, is the best path forward, is that we elect new leaders who do things and see things very, very differently. And we can modify our capital flows very, very quickly if we so choose. We all just saw it. We just printed several $1 trillion primarily for big banks and corporations. There is no reason why we cannot simply give people $1,000-$2,000 a month to meet their basic needs.
The month after Yang dropped out, the pandemic struck. All of a sudden, it felt like everyone was talking about UBI, or at least some form of an income supplementing program. But COVID-19 is likely just the first in a series of worldwide shocks we'll have to steel ourselves for moving forward. How UBI factors into our solutions during future periods of unrest is still to be determined. For starters, the threat of automation isn't going anywhere. A landmark 2013 analysis from Oxford University found 47% of all jobs in the US are at risk of being lost due to automation in the next 25 years. And that's just based on the technology we know about now.
This is an insurance in the long run against something like automation. Really, it's unclear how much job loss there would be and, at what term. But I personally believe that it's definitely a serious concern, something that is legitimate to worry about. And therefore, universal basic income is a form of, pre-insurance just in case. So being able to have that floor, that ensures that nobody falls through the cracks is important.
And there's the political feasibility of it all.
So it's definitely an idea that can be popular with both sides. The amount of agreement often depends on implementation, and there is a tendency for progressives to want to see a universal basic income on top of the existing welfare system, while more conservative, libertarian-leaning thinkers want to replace some or all of the existing welfare system with a universal basic income. And so that's where there is some divergence, even though, there could be quite a bit of agreement on the principle and why it's a good idea.
And there's also the matter of public support. Though a World Bank study found UBI-like cash transfers to the poor led to no upticks in alcohol or tobacco sales, plenty of people might cling to the misguided idea that if people got extra cash, they'd only spend it on frivolous purchases instead of necessities. But with more and more people strapped for cash in light of the pandemic, public support is shifting too.
There's research that's looking a lot into this issue, especially from developing countries where a lot of experiments were run. And it turns out that in general, there is no increase in spending on, drugs and alcohol. And in fact, in one very interesting study from the US, there's actually a decrease in drug dependence. And an increase in mental health, a betterment of mental health, especially among youth. And so, if anything, the opposite is true, that a universal basic income can allow people to improve their mental health and therefore be less likely to resort to drugs to address their lack of everyday well-being.
If you put $2,000 a month into the hands of the average American, they're going to spend most all of it in their community. And so where does it go? To daycare centers, to local nonprofits, to Little League signups, to the local restaurant and bar or food truck. We can make the economy trickle up and rebuild our communities in ways that actually match up to our needs and values. You would give rise to this massive boom in entrepreneurship because all of a sudden millions of Americans would know that their basic needs were going to be met next month, and they'd start thinking, okay, what should I do? We would particularly unlock women and underrepresented minorities because they have lower levels of savings and access to investment capital and the rest of it. So they've been stifled in terms of entrepreneurship and value creation. So it's, again, this is just a social choice. This is our great hope.